We're gonna play a little rock and roll right now. Just let me hear some of that rock and roll.
Rock and roll. Rock and roll, man. Rock and roll music. Rock and roll. Rock and roll. Rock and roll. Rock, rock, rock and roll. Rock and roll. Rock and roll. Rock and roll.
All right. Welcome
Rock
to the
and
It's
Roll.
Only Rock and Roll podcast.
Why do you call it that? Only rock and roll? Just because the song says it's only rock and roll.
Do you not know the format by now? I thought I told you to wait in the car.
Go ahead.
I'm Don 𝗙𝗂𝗧𝗘, and man, we got a good one this week. To the best of my knowledge, and I'm sure someone out there will correct me if I'm wrong, there's only about 6 people in this entire world who can say they played bass with John Lennon. Klaus Voormann, Tony Levin, Gordon Edwards, I'd say Stu Sutcliffe counts, and of course Paul McCartney, and our guest today, a member of the New York-based Elephant's Memory Band, Gary Van Scyoc. Today's guest is one of only a handful of musicians who can say they played bass guitar with John Lennon. As a member of the New York-based Elephant's Memory, he recorded and performed live with the ex-Beatle and his wife Yoko Ono at several now historic appearances. He later went on to play with Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and today he passes on his passion for music by teaching, and has written a best-selling instructional book, Shortcuts to Improving Your Bass Playing. Please welcome to the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast, Gary Van Scyoc. Hello, Gary.
Hey, Don, how you doing?
Pretty
it's
good.
It's only rock and roll, baby.
But I like it.
Good. I'm glad you like the Lennon stuff that I played on. Thanks for putting up Woman is the Boop of the World.
I know. John was ahead of his time on so many things.
Oh, my gosh. And Yoko. Yeah, Yoko came up with all the lyrics for that, really. And so many other things behind the scenes that Yoko was really responsible for. And John kind of sometimes told me he felt a little guilty about it because they were always on her so bad, you know. And he was in a predicament that he didn't want to forsake his career that he was trying to promote as a single artist. So she kind of got lost in the weeds here and there.
'Tis true. But before we get into that, I want to know your earliest memories of rock and roll. What got you started?
Oh, well, it was very easy with me. I was born in 1946. Everybody can do the math.
Mm-hmm.
Elvis Presley was it for me. When I saw Elvis Presley, I just totally lost it. I was too old to have a babysitter. My mother was very possessive of people that came around, I guess. So I would pantomime Elvis records, and I would cut out black sideburns and scotch tape them to the side of my head. That's how much I got off on Elvis. And that continued, and when I got in high school, I had a band director that was a bass player. So he took me under his wing.
And you grew up in Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh area, yeah. Waynesburg is the name of the town. It's about 50 miles south of Pittsburgh, but I consider myself a Pittsburgher. Especially when I got into the Hall of Fame in Pittsburgh. I got to take credit for the Pittsburgh Hall of Fame.
That's right. You can't deny your Pittsburgh roots now.
Yeah.
And how about the local radio at the time? Was there any DJs around that?
Oh, that was what it was all about from my young high school bands and stuff. We were a lot of soul music in Pittsburgh. There was a particular disc jockey called 𝗚𝗏𝗧𝗏 Chadwick on a station called WAMO. He actually put my record. I had a band in my freshman year in college that did a single called The Fife Piper, and we ended up being on Hanna-Barbera Records, the Flintstone label.
And that was the Dynatones, am I right?
Yeah, and it was a big hit in top 40. Anyway, that was a great way to get started with a hit record when you're 19.
And that wasn't your only foray into recording. I guess in 1970 you had a band that I've been listening to, actually, Pig Iron.
Oh, I loved Pig Iron. It was an English guy, Alan Abrams, came over and wanted to start a real American roots kind of bluesy. The horn bands were big then, like Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
I was going to say, it sounds like that Al Cooper era Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were actually on Columbia Records and got signed by Columbia, and that was a pretty big selling record. It also got the best album cover of 1969. So notice the cover is like the East meets West, the trains, and they superimposed everybody in the band on one of the locomotives. It was very cool, catchy for 69.
Sure.
In those days, they gave out awards for album covers. That's like a joke now, Nobody even knows what an album cover is.
Right. Now, why did did it split up? Did you leave them? What ended up happening there?
Yeah, I was kind of like the leader of the band because the drummer and the leader that got that project together, as I said, was from England. And we just really had a lot of problems with him. And I decided, you know what, I'll take everybody in the band and we'll just continue without him.
Right.
So I guess that was my initiative that I took to do that. And it was a flop. We were dead in 6 months. Nobody wanted to pick us up. And so that was the end of that. And I moved on to another gig with an Atlantic band called Mr. Flood's Party. And who was notable in Mr. Flood's Party? Huey McCracken, if you know who Huey McCracken is. That's how I first met Huey and did a lot of sessions with him. And he was just a wonderful player. And I just couldn't believe it when he told me that he turned down the Paul McCartney gig. It was like a shock to me.
Wow.
Little did I know then that it was only a little time later I'd be working with John.
I know. Now, this confused me a little bit because Elephant's Memory as a unit was already in existence. They had done songs for the Midnight Cowboy album. That you were not part of that.
Thanks for doing your homework, man.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Well, I know you were not part of that, right?
That was way back. And I'm talking, they started the band almost like in 1965, 66. So they'd been been together a while before I even got the nod to be in the band. So they had a cattle call in the Village Voice, which for those listeners that don't know, it was like a newspaper in the village back in the day, and they would put in ads, and musicians would answer the ads and show up for a cattle call, and you'd go up against God knows how many people. I think almost 70 bass players showed up for the gig.
Wow.
But I think they had been checking me out before because I was doing a lot of studio work and stuff. So I think, even though we went through the motions of the cattle call, I think they had a pretty good idea that I might be a finalist starting out because of my experience with the band you just mentioned, Pig Iron.
So you guys were New York, a lot of activism, obviously, that time. And I know you don't like being labeled a street band because I don't even know what a street band puts me in the mind of, like someone busking on the corner for dimes or something.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. Everybody would, because John did David Peel, that's the definition of a street band.
Right.
David Peel literally played on the street busking with a few sidemen. I think that's why they lump us in with the David Peel concept, because they didn't know how to explain us where our origins were. It wouldn't have been too hard to do it. They, like you said, we had a gold album for Midnight Cowboy and a couple of hit singles even before we met John.
Right.
So, but somehow that rubbed off. I don't know why, but we were really studio players. I was doing Pig Iron and all the other guys, Elephant's Memory, and since 65, it had one record deal after another. They were on Buddha for a while. They were on Metro Media Records, and before we even knew about Apple being interested in John.
And now the question you're probably so sick of being asked. How did you guys come to the attention of John and Yoko?
It's a story I've told a million times. I never get tired of telling it. We did a live show, Don, out on Long Island at a place called WLIR. I think the station is still there, but it might be a country now or something. But anyway, they used to do live broadcasts where you go into the station and actually play in a studio room, and they would tape it and then air it then or later or whatever they decided to do. So we made this tape. We did a half-an-hour show, maybe 40 minutes tops with the encore. I remember Billy Joel was the opening act, and nobody in the band even knew who he was. Wow. Even though I had auditioned for him about a year previously when he was in a band called The Vagrants. And we did that show, and somebody slipped the tape of it to the activist Jerry Rubin, who John was friending and hanging out a little bit with in 1971. So that's how John and Yoko heard us, with that tape initially. And we didn't think anything about it. We said, boy, that'd be nice. We'd like to maybe play with him or something out of that or whatever. And I would see him during the day when I went to my rehearsals down in the village. John and Yoko were living on a street called Bank Street, which is just down the block from us, where we rehearsed at a studio called Magna Graphics. And I would see John almost every day going to rehearsal. They'd be at the deli, the Korean deli down the street or whatever, or just, running around. But you didn't really run up to people in those days and say, "Hey, you're John Lennon."
Right.
But one night, to speed up the story, we were rehearsing at Magna Graphics, and the roadies came in and said, John and Yoko are out in the lobby, and they want to play with you guys. And we thought they were kidding. And again, to speed it up, we left them waiting out there for a long time, and then finally they came in, and it was true. We just about had a heart attack when we saw them in that white suit from Abbey Road, basically, is what it looked like to me.
Yeah.
It was just so striking to see him
Yeah.
dressed like that for the first time we met him. And we played all night. That was about 11 o'clock at night, and we played till like 5 in the morning. And John and Yoko, pipe up, "Hey, we'd really like to join your band." And, we looked at each other and went, "How in the hell is that going to work?" And so after more discussion, we got real and decided on a merger. And Yoko spoke up and said, "Wait a minute, Plastic Ono and Elephant's Memory spells poem." You know how she is.
Very Yoko.
With all
Yes.
that catchy stuff.
Yeah.
So she was already working on the marketing idea for the band, in only a few hours. So we agreed, and we had to do a little finagling to get out of our contract with Intermedia Records at the time, but that was a dead issue anyway. So John said, "Would you like to be on Apple?" And we knew that was going to be a disaster, because at the time, they were practically falling apart.
Of course.
They were fighting over money,
Right.
and Alan Klein and this and that. So, but what could we do? When a Beatle asked you to be on their label, I knew that even James Taylor had flopped on Apple.
Right.
It wasn't a good idea. I didn't know Joey Mullen from Badfinger then, but I've later played with him, and we've had a lot of great talks and laughs about Apple and this and that. As a matter of fact, Joey and I both appeared in a documentary on Apple Records called Strange Fruit, if anybody wants to pick that up. And when I heard how Joey was going on and off about Apple, I didn't feel too bad about ragging on him a little bit,
Right.
because we just really didn't get any promotion at all. I remember the day we went up to Apple Records, 1500 Broadway, and went up to the penthouse and was looking around in Apple, and Adam Ippolito, the keyboard player in Elephants, we said, "Let's go find the promotion department." So we're running around from door to door, back these long halls, and so we got, after about 20 minutes, we realized Apple didn't have a promotion department.
How can that be?
They just put out a record, and we went gold and platinum. That's all they had to do.
Wow.
So that was a disappointment. So they did nothing for us in that regard in promoting our first record, which John produced.
What's the
few months
chronology
later.
there? Did you do sometime in New York City first?
Yes.
Okay.
We did the Mike Douglas show down in Philadelphia. That didn't end up being a record. Well, actually, it is a record. It's a DVD.
It's a DVD.
already.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, before we get to that first night you guys jammed, how did it work out? Was he saying, "Let's do a such and such song, a Chuck Berry tune"? Or, do you remember any specifics?
Yeah, it was subtle. It was nothing like preordained or anything. It's just, we just went from this to that, and then somebody'd start this or mention something, and he'd be going right into Dizzy Miss Lizzie or something, you know what I mean? And we did all the Chuck Berry tunes he loved, and Elvis. A lot of Elvis.
Yeah.
We actually did Elvis at the Garden. But anyway, it was just kind of spontaneous, and we played for hours. Our fingers were tired, and we played for hours every day. We'd already been playing 2 or 3 hours before he got there, so it was a real workout. He hadn't been playing, and at first we wondered, is he going to be able to cut it,
Yeah.
But he was a little rusty for the first 20 minutes, but after that, he really just, took off. He was really digging it.
All right, that's just what I was going to ask.
Time.
What was your initial impression of him as a guitar player?
Well, little shaky, like I said at first.
Yeah,
but boy, after he got such a rhythm player, I mean, it's just, wow, it was just there. You could just build around it. It was like the groove was, if we didn't have a groove already, here's something else you can grab onto and really hang your hat.
Right.
He really laid it down.
So you did the TV show first, Mike Douglas.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, we'd only been rehearsing with them like a week or 10 days.
Oh, I didn't know it was
and
that.
we got the call to do that. We were shitting in our pants.
I bet.
I mean, national TV. Could we have a couple more rehearsals, please?
You guys did it was a couple of days you on, a couple episodes.
Whole week, 5 days.
Right.
Yeah,
and I know
crazy.
TV sound is terrible. I mean, they don't set you up as good as if you were doing a live concert.
You were lucky if you had an SM57 on the bass,
Really? Oh, my God. So that's a struggle right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. It wasn't too good back in those days, but we had to make the best of it. That's what it was then. I think and laugh about it now, but then that was what they had,
This might be a little bit off base, but Roger Ailes was actually the producer of that show.
Right. There's a side note.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I had read somewhere, and I don't know if this is just nonsense, but there was when Bobby Seale was on, there was some problem backstage because he had a gun on him, and there was some...
Well, he had a little entourage with him.
Okay.
It wasn't him. It was a couple guys that were with him. They were just hired bodyguards, John would hire later on when we would be at the record plant. He had a couple of guys he hired that were ex-New York City police cops that hung out with us. Great guys. And they'd be packing,
Yeah.
And then later on, it was a Secret Service we had to deal with because Jackie Kennedy Onassis showed up. She had a bunch of guys with her, too, so that was just like par for the course back then. It was crazy.
Now, was that just during a session, just interrupt and...
Yeah, just one quick call. John, I could tell by the look on John's face, he was not happy. Not that he was not happy to meet her, but we were really heavy in the middle of something. We had trouble with Phil Spector. He was there the first couple of nights, and this is sometime in New York City I'm talking about now,
right.
Just to clarify.
Sure.
After Mike Douglas, we went in to do the Sometime in New York City record, and the first couple of nights Phil was producing, and he would do the thing about put the silver-handed revolver on the board with the bag of cocaine and craziness, and John would come up with all kinds of crazy stuff to get Phil crazy, basically, so he could get him out of there. He was just not digging on him at all. So finally, Phil didn't dig us. He didn't like working with us. He was very out of sorts because it wasn't Eric and George Harrison and the normal crew, Klaus and this and that. So he really gave us the look down your nose, and but that was fine with me because he was a jerk as far as I was concerned, and we couldn't wait to get rid of him. The murderer.
Yeah, I know. Now, were you going direct inject, or were you miking the amp? How were you recording in those sessions? Both?
Yeah, 𝗀𝗧𝗘𝗧 at the record plant would do both, and they did a mix of the two, direct signal and the mic bass, and I loved it. It was so warm. I would do that till this day, If anybody was set up for it or could understand it, why?
I remember I heard John had given him some direction that he didn't want to sound like a Beach Boys record, too clean.
He hated anything that was clean. He would just dirty things up just to dirty it up. He really hated that really clean thing. So
right.
It's been well documented that he wouldn't even do his vocals unless he had slap echo on it. He liked to play with it. He had gotten used to it years before, and he really dug working that way. So he wouldn't do any vocals unless it had echo or something going on, slap or whatever.
Right.
So, but that was cool.
I want to get into the one-to-one concert, but I got a question. When Live in New York City came out on videotape many, many, many moons ago. VHS, yeah. There was another bass player there in a white robe.
Yeah, lovely guy.
Who was it, and how was he connected to Elephant's
I'll be
memory?
glad to explain it to you. That was John Ward, and he was from up in New England somewhere, around Maine or something like that. And he was the Elephant's Memories bass player for all those years previous to when I joined the band.
Okay.
And he had left the band only like 8 months before I joined. So he was still up at a commune or something up in New England somewhere. And what happened is, John, when we were rehearsing at the Fillmore East for the one-to-one show, they had two keyboard players, our keyboard player, 𝗙𝗂𝗹𝗪, and Yoko, and Tex Gabriel, our guitar player, and John on guitar, and 2 drummers because John wanted to use Jim Keltner from the Plastic Ono band. That was the only player he wanted to retain from that band or those sessions. And our drummer, Rick Frank. So basically, there were 2 of everything except me. So he got the bright idea. He comes to rehearsal one day and he says, I'm going to ask Noel Redding to be the second bass player at the show. And my heart sank. I mean, it's, oh, shit. Nobody in the press will ever mention me if Noel Redding is on the gig, you know?
Yeah.
So that was not a good news to my ears. But it only lasted about a day. He didn't want to do it. He was too strung out or couldn't make it or whatever. I don't remember. But so they said, you know what? We'd love to ask John Ward. And I says, there you go. That makes sense. Because I had actually met him, and he was just such a sweetheart of a guy, and he was in this commune now and had been for a year or so up there. And that's why he had that, if you look at the tape that you're talking about, he's wearing this long white robe. And the girls at the commune had made that. They had all pitched in and handmade that for him for the garden show. And I thought that was kind of cool.
He barely moved a muscle. I mean, he's just...
They didn't end up taking him in a lot of the recordings, even though you're seeing him, you're not really hearing him much, because John Lennon had bought me an old 52 Telecaster bass. He went out and bought all kinds of instruments for everybody, and a Hammond organ for our keyboard player and this and that.
Yeah.
But he bought me an old 52 Tele. The only problem with the 52 Tele was it had this incredible, horrendous buzz to it. So they ended up with that buzz a little bit, and I don't think if he's in the mixes here and there, it's not much, you know. Yeah. Because we doubled most of the stuff, and I actually wrote out a couple of things for him an octave higher than me that was barely audible in the final mixes. I'm hoping when they finally do that again, I think they will eventually. Jack Douglas, I saw at the screening of the movie, the Lennon movie, Lennon NYC. Are you familiar with that?
I saw it many times,
Okay. So when they had the opening of that in Central Park, Jack Douglas told me he had spoken with Yoko, and she's finally ready to do the one-to-one concert again and remaster and remix the whole thing.
And do the nighttime show, too. Most
exactly.
of that's the afternoon.
2 shows, 25,000 people. Right. 25,000 people done with tambourines, if you can imagine what that's like.
That must have been. And only half of them with rhythm. So that, right?
All the ones with no rhythm were in the front row, as far as I was concerned. It was a little distracting, but we were so loud, it really didn't make any difference. They say it's one of the loudest concerts ever. I mean, it was just mind-blowingly loud.
Have we heard everything that was done at the concert?
Yeah, pretty much. John had a little bit of a cold, so... And plus, you know, he had to gear himself for 2 performances. He knew he really couldn't play for hours, you know, so, that was pretty much the same lineup of songs in the afternoon and the evening, and you kind of have to look I have to look sometimes real close at clips here and there to see what shirt I had on, because I changed shirts. Had the same satin suit that I had handmade for him. He footed the bill for that. It was pretty nice of him, and he gave everybody like $500, $600, $700 to buy new clothes for the show and this and that. And that was a lot of money in those days.
Oh yeah. I understand the relationship between Elephant's Memory and John and Yoko came to an end kind of unceremoniously with a letter, I believe.
Yeah, but, well, that's after the fact. I appreciated the fact that he was nice enough to send us a letter, because he really needed to clear things up, because he had bought us almost $100,000 worth of equipment to do a live tour. So he footed the bill for that, or Apple did. They weren't happy about it. Plus, we were on retainer of $1,000 a week for years.
Oh, that's cool.
Hard to take, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, he really didn't dig the thing about playing out as much as he wanted to do the world tour. So the reason that didn't happen is he didn't have a green card. I guess you've seen that in the movie or whatever.
Right.
So it was all about the green card. But the reason he sent us the letter was about the equipment. But the reason I think the gist of your question is, why did we part ways? And that had nothing to do with Elephant's Memory. That was because of him and Yoko splitting up. John had some serious transgressions, and the best way I can put it.
Yeah.
And got nailed, and she kicked him out of the house. So before I knew it, he was calling me from L.A., you know? It was like, what the hell are you doing out there?
Right.
And why isn't Yoko with you?
Right.
You know, so it was a beautiful letter just to clear up. I don't know what to tell you to do about the equipment. You can't keep a good band down. You guys can't expect to know what you're doing because I never knew what I was doing. And the green card mess and the whole thing. So it's just a beautiful letter and parting of the ways. And it's history then, you know, you got that crazy thing going on in L.A., you know.
Right.
So.
What do you think the biggest misconception is publicly of John Lennon and Yoko Ono?
Oh, definitely Yoko. She was such a driving force creatively and, you know, personally. You know, I just loved her. I loved playing on her double record. It was, I think, Elephant's Memory was shown on that album more than we did playing with John. Of course, John was producing at the time, but still, I just love her double album, Approximately Infinite Universe. I mean, nothing against the live record and the Sometime in New York City record or our Apple record, all of which he produced, but just working with her was just, you know, was just exciting. And of course, he was right there beside her at the time, but it was, I think that's, people just don't realize, you know, she wrote the lyrics for Imagine, basically.
Right.
I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that's coming out now that I've been saying for years, you know. I don't even know whether she's still got her due yet, you know.
No.
Maybe never will.
No.
And it was disappointing, you know, when I would be in England and several times and, you know, people still hate her there. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's too bad.
It really is.
She certainly paid a high price for.
She really did.
Yeah.
Well said. Thank you.
Speaking of which, what are your memories of that night, December 8th, 1980?
Oh, my goodness. I've told this story in many, many interviews. It couldn't be more poignant to me because I was actually on the scene when John was killed. I was going to a jazz club at 11 o'clock. I had reservations for a club right across the street from the Dakota. It was called Paulson's. And a friend of mine picked me up on my East 84th Street apartment. And we did the cross street through the park, which comes out right at the Dakota. So we come out of the park, stop at the stop sign, and there was a police car pulling away from the Dakota. And somehow, I don't know, I just got the vibe, man. I know that sounds corny, but I just got the vibe. I said, oh my God, I hope nothing's happened to John. And by the time we parked the car at a meter and walked in the front door of the club, already all of the waitresses in the club were running around hysterically screaming and crying that John had been shot. So that's how I found out. And I swear it was only, but within 20 minutes, there were 300 people on the street already.
Sure.
We were lucky to be able to get a sense about us and get back outside and get our car out of the parking spot and get back over to my east side apartment because it was just, you know, by the time we were pulling out, there were probably 500-600 people. It was just reverberating through the streets of Manhattan. It was just unbelievable. And of course, you know, that's history. You know, you've seen the shots of what it ended up being, you know, thousands of people. And we went home and saw all the stuff that everybody saw on Monday Night Football, like everybody else, you know, at my apartment. It was just, what a night.
I know.
You know, but to be there on the scene, obviously, is something I'll never forget. And I think of it every year.
I bet. And obviously, life went on for you as a musician, post working with John and Yoko, and you did some work with Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley.
Yeah, right after that, we toured. How great is that? You know, we did this one concert with John, and John was at the concert, I'm trying to say, that we did of Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley at the Anderson Theater. We wrote a little song on our album about that. And it ended up, you know, Chuck, from being on the Mike Douglas show, loved us when he met us. And we got the call from Chess to go out and be his touring band. So we did quite a few dates. And I think we're the only live band, per se, that was asked to do a record with him, with Chess. There's a record on chess called Bio by Chuck Berry. I don't think he's ever had a whole band come in and back him up. It's usually just been studio players or whatever. And of course, on the road, he just did pickup bands. But we loved playing with him, and Bo Diddley as well. He was just an amazing guy. They were quite the duo to have on the same show. They would complement each other in many ways and sometimes do a few songs together at the end of the night with Elephants. And it was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's very cool. And did I hear you were the house band for Atlantic Records for a time? And worked
I was in the house band at Atlantic for like the year before I was with Elephants. And the whole year, the first year I worked with John, I was still doing all that stuff. My friend, Jerry Ragavoy, was the owner of the Hit Factory.
He wrote my favorite song, Stay With Me by Lorraine Ellison.
God,
what a song.
He wrote Time Is On My Side, right?
Really? No, I didn't know that. I know he wrote Piece of My Heart, but I didn't know that.
He wrote Time Is On My Side, and because he was with, I may have it backwards, excuse me if I do, but I think he was signed with ASCAP, and there was some thing where he couldn't do it with BMI, so he had to use another name for the writing of that song. That was common back then.
Yeah.
They would just take on another name and write something. So, you won't find Jerry's name on the record, but he wrote Time Is On My Side. How heavy is that?
I love that original version, too.
Oh, my God.
You've been more than generous with your time, and I want to thank you.
I enjoy it, Don. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
Real quick, you want to plug anything?
Sure. Well, I have a record that's on my website, www.GaryVanScyoc.com, and it's called Pop Goes the Elephant. I had a lot of old tracks that I wanted to put out. I wrote a song for my wife for our anniversary called Eva. And put that on there. But one of the nice things that's on there is that I had a track of the original Elephants Memory playing an instrumental version of Imagine just a couple of weeks after John was killed. So that's on there, and that's never been released. It's on my record. So, as I said, you can get that on the www.GaryVanScyoc.com.
Elephants Memory Band with Gary Van I can't get that name. Scyoc. I always say it wrong.
Gary Van Scyoc, bass player.
Oh, not bad, huh?
He was very hirsute in those days.
Oh?
You know what that word means?
Hairy.
Hairy.
I went to the 7th grade. I had my vocabulary list.